The train let her off at Sweetgrass Bend a little after noon, and the first words the man waiting for her said were that he had not ordered a widow with 3 mouths to feed. He said it the way a man reads a bill he never agreed to pay. Flat, final, his jaw set against the cold March wind that came down off the Montana flats and rattled the loose board on the depot roof. He had a letter folded in his coat pocket and a woman's name written on it, and he had come all the way into town with a clean shirt on and his boots knocked free of mud, and now he stood there, looking at the 3 small faces lined up behind her skirts, like he'd been handed somebody else's life by mistake. Maren Tate was 34 years old, and she had buried a husband 11 weeks before, and she had crossed 2 territories with everything she owned, in 2 carpet bags and a wooden crate, and she knew the sound of a door closing before it ever shut. She heard it now. "I wrote that I had children," she said. Her voice did not shake, though her hands, gripping the handles of the bags, had gone white at the knuckle. "I wrote it twice, once in the first letter and once in the third. You wrote a child." The man's name was Elan Renner, and he was 41 years old, and he had ranched the same stubborn quarter section north of town for going on 16 years. Singular, a child, not a girl and a boy, and he stopped, looking at the smallest one, a girl no older than a year and a half, asleep against Maren's shoulder, with her fist curled into the wool of her mother's collar. Not 3 of them. "Then the post lost a page," Maren said quietly, "because I never once meant to lie to you. I had a child when I wrote the first letter. By the time I wrote the third, my sister was gone, and her 2 were mine. That is the whole of it. I will not apologize for taking in my own blood. What she did next, nobody on that platform expected." She set the bags down, not in surrender but to free her hand, and she reached back and drew the oldest child against her, a girl of 9 with her mother's same dark, steady eyes, and she said to Elias Renner, the only thing she had left to say, "We will not be a burden you didn't agree to carry. Tell me when the next train comes through, and we'll wait for it on that bench, and you'll never hear from us again." Then she picked the bags up once more, all at once, the way a person lifts a thing they have decided to carry the rest of the way alone, and she turned toward the bench at the end of the platform. And Elias Renner, who had spent 16 years learning to want nothing he could lose, stopped her. He didn't grab her arm. He wasn't that kind of man. He just said her name, Mrs. Tate, and something in the way he said it made her turn around. "The next train through Sweetgrass Bend isn't till Thursday," he said. "It's Monday. You can't sit 4 days on a depot bench with a baby." He looked at the ground, then at the sky, then anywhere but at the 3 children watching him. "And I've got a roof, whatever else I haven't got. Come on, we'll sort the rest of it out where it's warm." The girl of 9, whose name was Annie, looked up at her mother to see whether this was good news or bad. Maren did not yet know herself. But she had learned, in 11 hard weeks, that warm was warm, and you took it when it was offered, and you settled the accounts later. So she followed him to the wagon. The ride out to the Renner place took the better part of an hour, the wheels grinding over ruts still half frozen, and nobody said much. The boy Sam was 6, and he sat at the back of the wagon with his legs hanging off and watched the town shrink behind them with the grave attention of a child who has already learned that places do not keep you. The baby, Tess, woke once, fussed, and went back to sleep, and Annie sat close against her mother and counted fence posts under her breath, which was a thing she did when she was frightened and trying not to show it. Elias Renner watched all of this out of the corner of his eye and said nothing, and his jaw stayed set. The house, when they reached it, was smaller than the word house had promised, but it was sound, and it was clean in the particular way of a place kept by a man who has nobody to keep it for. There was a single bed, a table with 1 chair, a stove, and a long quiet that had clearly lived there a good while. Maren stood in the doorway and understood, in a breath, the whole shape of the man she had agreed to marry sight unseen. A man who had built something and then forgotten what it was for. "I'll take the barn," he said, before she could ask. There's a loft. It's not the first winter I've slept in it. He set her crate down by the wall. You and the children take the house. We can't put you out of your own. You're not putting me out of anything. He said it sharp, then caught himself, and the next words came softer. It's been a long time since this place had a reason to be warm. Let it have one. That was the first night. What none of them knew yet was how long the cold in that house had been waiting for someone to break it. It came out slow, the way such things do. Over the next days, Marin learned the geography of the place and the geography of the man, and the two were not so different. She learned there had been a wife. Elias did not say the name for a long while, and that she had passed some 4 years gone, in the autumn, quiet and at home, the kind of going where a person grows tired, and then more tired, and then simply rests. There had been no child. Marin learned this not from him, but from the second best evidence in any house, which is the things a person cannot bring themselves to throw away. A small carved horse on the windowsill, sanded smooth, waiting for hands that had never come. She did not ask about it. She only moved it, once, to dust beneath it, and set it back exactly where it had been, and Elias saw her do it, and something in his face moved like a door tried in the dark. The children, for their part, did what children do, which is to fill a silence whether or not they have been given leave to. Sam discovered the barn cat and named her Biscuit, and followed Elias to the milking each morning, asking the kind of questions a man cannot answer and cannot stop trying to. Annie took over the kitchen the way a small general takes a hill, and by the 3rd day there was bread, and by the 5th there were curtains made from a bolt of cloth out of Marin's crate, and the house began, against everyone's expectation, to look lived in. And Tess, who was 1.5 years old and afraid of nothing, took one look at the big silent man who slept in the barn and decided he was hers. The morning it happened, Elias was sitting on the step pulling on his boots, and Tess toddled out the open door before anyone could catch her, and she went straight to him and put both hands flat on his knee and said the only full word she yet owned, which was up. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked her up, careful as a man handling something he is sure he will break, and he held her on his arm, and she patted his unshaven jaw with one fat hand and laughed at the scratch of it. Marin, watching from the doorway, saw the thing in his face that he had been guarding for 4 years finally give way. But grief does not surrender so easy, and what it gave that morning, it tried to take back by nightfall. That evening he was short with all of them. He found fault with the woodpile, with the gate left open, with 100 small things that did not matter, and finally Marin followed him out to the barn in the blue dark and said, "Plain, you may as well say it." "Say what?" "Whatever it is you've been chewing on since that baby touched your face." He was quiet a long time. The lantern hissed. Somewhere, the cat moved in the straw. "I had a son," Elias said at last. "For a day. Just the one day, my wife." His voice caught, and he made it go on. "She wasn't strong after, and we lost him in the night. And then over the years I lost her too. By inches, and there was nothing in either case that I could do but stand there. I made my peace with wanting nothing. It's easier. A man can't lose what he never let himself have." He looked at her then, and there was no hardness left in it, only the old wound underneath. "And then you got off that train with 3 of them, and I felt it all come back, that wanting, and it scared me worse than anything has in years. That's the truth of why I said what I said. It wasn't the mouths to feed. I've got cattle and grain enough. It was that I knew the second I saw them I'd come to love them, and loving things is how a man gets his heart broke." Marin stood with that a moment. Then she said the truest thing she knew. "My husband's name was Daniel," she said. "He was a good man, and he died in a roof fall on another man's barn for a day's wages, and I have been angry about it every hour since, and I'll likely be angry the rest of my life, and I could have let that anger make me hard. I thought about it. It would have been easier, like you said." She shook her head slowly. But I've got 3 children watching to learn from me what a person does when the worst thing happens. And I'll be damned if what they learn from me is to shut the door and call it safety. Bitterness is just grief that's given up. I'm not ready to give up, and I don't think you are either, or you'd have let me sit on that bench Thursday. What happened over the rest of that spring was not sudden, and that is exactly why it held. There was no single morning where everything changed. There were 100 small ones. Elias moved the carved horse from the windowsill to the foot of Sam's bed and said nothing about it, and Sam slept with it under his pillow and never knew what it had cost. He taught Annie to read the weather off the western ridge, and she taught him, without meaning to, how to laugh at a supper table again. He carried Tess on his shoulders out to see the new calves, and she shrieked with the joy of it, and he found himself grinning like a fool with nobody to see. There was a night in April that sealed it, though none of them called it that at the time. A heifer went into a hard labor in the small hours, the kind that can take both the mother and the calf if a man is slow or unlucky, and Elias was out in the barn with his sleeves rolled and his arms slicked to the elbow when he heard the door creak. It was Sam, 6 years old and barefoot in the cold, who had woken to the lantern light and come to see. Marin appeared a moment behind him to fetch him back to bed, but Elias, without looking up, said, "Leave him. A boy ought to see how a thing gets saved." So Sam stood at the rail and watched, solemn and wide-eyed, while Elias worked through the long dark, talking low to the frightened animal the whole while. And when at last the calf came, steaming and alive into the straw, and struggled up onto its new legs, Sam let out a breath like he'd been holding it for an hour, and he looked at Elias the way a child looks at a man he has decided to become. "Did we save it?" the boy asked. "We did," Elias said, and he had not missed the "we," and it sat warm in his chest the rest of that night. The talk in town came, as talk does. At the Mercantile that week, a woman Marin had never met looked over the 3 children gathered at the candy jar and said, not quite under her breath, that Elias Renner had taken on a ready-made family and a stranger's troubles besides, and that some men had more charity than sense. Elias was at the counter with his hat in his hand, and he heard it, and he did not flush or argue. He only set his coins down and turned and said, "Mild as you please. I'll thank you to count my blessings. A little more careful, ma'am. I came to town with an empty house and a hard heart, and I'm leaving it with neither. If that's a man with no sense, then I've been a fool for 41 years, and I aim to stay one." And he put his hat on and walked his family out into the sun, and the matter was never raised in his hearing again. And one evening in May, when the flats had gone green, and the light hung long and gold the way it does on the high plains, Marin found him standing at the edge of the yard, looking out at the children chasing each other through the grass. And he said, without turning, "I'd like to do this proper, if you'll have me. Not because of the letter, not because the train comes Thursday." He turned then, "Because I'd be a poorer man the day any one of you got back on it. Marry me, Marin, for real, and for good." She did not answer right away. She let him stand in it, the way he had let her stand on that platform. Then she smiled, the first full smile he had seen from her, and she said, "It's about time you asked." They were married in the little church at Sweetgrass Bend the following Sunday, and the whole arrangement that had begun as a mistake on a depot platform became, without any of them quite deciding it, a family. Annie stood up beside her mother in a dress made from the last of the bolt of cloth. Sam carried the ring on the carved wooden horse, which seemed right to everyone and was never explained. And Tess sat on Elias's arm through the whole of the ceremony, patting his jaw, saying up, 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 until even the preacher had to stop and laugh. Years later, and there were many years, good ones, people in town would tell the story of how Elias Renner had stood on the platform and announced to half of Sweetgrass Bend that he hadn't ordered a widow with 3 mouths to feed. They told it as a joke, mostly, the way small towns sand down their hardest moments into something a person can hold. But Elias never told it that way. When his children were grown and had children of their own, and one of them asked him how he and their grandmother had come to marry, he always told it the same. He said a woman got off a train with everything she had and 3 reasons to keep going, and he had been fool enough and frightened enough to nearly let her walk to a bench and wait 4 days for a train that would have taken the best thing he never knew he wanted. "What changed your mind?" they always asked. And Elias Renner, who had spent the first half of his life learning to want nothing he could lose, and the second half learning he'd been wrong about every bit of it, always gave the same answer. "She picked up her bags," he'd say. "And I finally understood that the only thing worse than losing something is being too afraid to ever have it. So I called her name, and thank God she turned around." The carved horse sits on a windowsill still, in a house full of grandchildren, sanded smooth by 4 generations of small hands. And every spring when the flats go green and the light hangs long and gold, somebody in that family tells the story of the widow with 3 mouths to feed, and how a hard man on a cold platform almost let her go, and then, at the last possible moment, did the bravest thing he ever did. He stopped her.